Directors to order. And I want to thank everybody for joining us outside your windows at what looks like a beautiful afternoon taking place. It's good to see everybody online. First, of course, as we start all of our meetings, I want to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and if you can please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We are meeting virtually today, so let me do a couple of quick reminders. We need to remember to keep our microphones muted. When you're not speaking, when you do speak, unmute your line, and then of course hit that mute button to bring it back in. Please feel free to utilize the chat box feature, whether you need to communicate with other board members or with staff. As a reminder, our webinars audio and video are also being live streamed on the COG website through the COG's YouTube account. Let me start with a brief announcement. I know what I'm gonna do is turn to Monica, and in the off chance the microphone's not working, maybe that's a quick jog over to Clark's office to do the roll call. But I want to share that we're very pleased to share that the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill that was approved by Congress and was signed by President Biden last week, it contains $500,000 in funding for a secondary water source study for the Metropolitan Washington area. This, as folks will recall, has been a long-time priority for our area leaders and for this board of directors in particular. The funding is going to be used by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to undertake the study in partnership with COG, the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, and area water utilities. As some of you might recall from some of our past presentations, the Potomac River currently provides about 4/5 of the region's water supply and 100% of the water to the District of Columbia and Arlington County. This funding will help evaluate options to address vulnerabilities in our water system and ensure the region remains resilient against threats such as severe drought due to climate change. I want to thank the COG staff for their hard work to get this funding and our region's congressional delegation for their leadership in moving forward this vital effort within the legislation. So thank you all very much. So now, Monica Nunez, you're going to complete the roll call so we can document everybody's presence here. So Monica, assuming microphone's working, let me turn it over to you.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Right. You did it. Okay, for the District of Columbia, I have Chair Allen and Council Member Brianne Nadeau. From Maryland jurisdictions, I have Mayor O'Connor, Council Member Mitchell, Mayor Jordan, County Executive Elrich, Council Member Glass, Council Member Stewart, Council Member Dernoga, Mayor Searcy, and Ms. Jackson. Is there anyone else from, I see we have Councilmember Watson, and back to the district, Ms. Perry.
Yes.
Anyone else from that I missed from Maryland or the district?
Ruben Collins.
Yes, Maryland, Frederick County Executive Jessica Fitzwater.
Okay, thank you.
And Ruben
Nice
Collins.
to see you, Vice Chair Collins. Thank you. Virginia, I have Ms. Garvey, Mr. Lusk, Mr. Walkinshaw, Ms. Tacroni, Mr. Wolf, Ms. Jefferson, Ms. Bailey, and Mr. Sickles. Anyone else from a Virginia jurisdiction?
Caroline Leon with the City of Falls Church.
Thank you.
It's Justin Wilson. I'm here as well.
All right, thank you. We have a quorum to proceed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, well, let me move on to agenda item 3 for us today, and that's going to be turning it over to Executive Director Clark Mercer to give his report. After that, we'll then move to any amendments to the agenda after that. But let me turn first to Mr. Mercer.
All right. Well, welcome everybody, and it's nice to see everyone's faces. And it reminds me when I see Supervisor Bailey, your face, I owe you a call. I will call you after this meeting. So it's nice for everyone to get on. It reminds me of all the things I still need to do on my list. A couple of updates, and then we'll move along with a really good agenda here. Chairman Mendelson had me before his oversight committee at the District of Columbia a couple weeks ago. That's an annual rite of passage, I'm told, for COG directors to sit before the chairman. And I thought that went well. Some really good questions and good follow-ups there with the chairman. A lot of work being done on Metro. I think folks are probably fairly up to speed on kind of where we are. The Maryland money is moving in that budget. It looks like that's in a good place, which is fantastic. The district, the mayor, Councilman Allen, Chair Allen, and Chairman Mendelson sent a letter several weeks ago indicating support to get the money that the district needs to fund Metro for the coming fiscal year. And in Virginia, I think particularly I'm looking at the faces of my Virginia members. There is a budget now sitting before the governor. He has some number of days to provide amendments and his thoughts and hopes and dreams on that budget. And in mid-April, the legislature will come back, although the budget sitting before him does have the full funding for Virginia. We will see what happens next month in Virginia. Hopefully that money stays where it is, and we can move forward. We will talk next month, and Chair Allen will lead this discussion once that kind of next year or two of funding is secure for Metro. We need to kind of collectively pivot pretty quickly as an organization to what is the big picture for transit in this region. And obviously Metro is a big part of that. What's the level of service we expect? What does it cost? How can you pay for it? And how can you govern it? And so obviously we're hopeful that the short term next 1 or 2 fiscal years gets figured out, and then we will move pretty quickly, and the chair will have some thoughts on what that might look like moving forward. Visualize 2050. I'm confident your staffs are in touch with Conti and the Transportation Planning Board. That is kind of the master plan on all major transportation projects, and we're receiving feedback on that plan through March 30th. And so all major transportation projects for the region to receive federal funding and approval have to be in TPB's master plan called Visualize 2050. So it's a good, if you haven't followed up with your transportation folks to make sure they're in touch and weighing in on that, please have them do that. Bike to Work Day is coming up on Friday, May 17th. That is something that COG facilitates behind the scenes, working with the Washington Area Bicyclists Association. So one, encourage you to participate. Amanda put a link in the profile there. There's 100 different pit stops across the region. Go by, say hello, thank folks for participating in that. And that is part of our transportation operations department here at COG. And a shout out to Dan Sheehan. He just got promoted and hired to take over for Nick Ramphos, who held that post for many years. And speaking of bicycling, our monthly podcast will be up soon, and it is on all things biking in the region. It features Mayor O'Connor from the city of Frederick, the Washington Area Bicycle Association senior planner, and our own senior planner, Mike Farrell. Lots of work being done by Jeff King and his team in our climate, energy, and air department. So a big shout out to Jeff. He has been leading a climate action plan for the region called PCAP, and that has been submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency, and that was made possible working through the District of Columbia Department of Energy and Environment. And that plan is for the whole MSA, so it's federally designated what that MSA is. It's our footprint plus a fair number of additional counties, and that's all about resiliency, and it's funded through the Inflation Reduction Act. That plan the plan is $4 billion. It's sitting on the books that the Biden administration is going to want to push out to the country for resiliency and climate energy type projects. So big thanks to Jeff and all his work. In public safety, and Scott Boggs has been extremely busy. Last week, his team brought together a multi-sector emergency preparedness council, did a tabletop on a simulation of a possible attack on our electrical substations. He's got a number of other tabletops. You've been emailed that information over the course of the year. Next week, the public safety team is hosting a 2-day fire health and safety symposium at the Masonic Temple in Alexandria. That's on March 19th and 20th. And Scott is in early discussions, and we will keep you posted on having a public safety and crime summit with partners from the Board of Trade and Greater Washington Partnership in late spring, early summer. Those details are still being pulled together, but we will make sure when dates and topics are established, that we share that with you. And we always have kind of a media bit in here. Steve's team has done a great job, in particular, of getting COG and your priorities in the news on Metro. You passed a resolution last month on opposing additional slots at Reagan National. That was picked up by all the carriers, and his team continues to do fantastic work in that space. So that is it for me. Kind of future discussions, Chair, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. We're starting to put together the outline for the summer retreat. And one of those items that we'll bring to you, our senior staff is going to be working on a strategic plan and mission statement for COG. I think we being a year in, one of the things I've noticed is we have a lot of one-off strategic plans for departments. And we also have a lot of goals that are 10, 20 years out, but really sitting down and professional facilitation with the staff. Where are we in the next kind of 3 to 5 years to accomplish some of those goals? And we're going to do some preliminary work, but obviously need your buy-in, support, and feedback to complete that. But that is one item that will be coming back to you probably at the summer retreat, which we're looking forward to. And with that, Chair, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. And yeah, I'll just kind of echo, one of the conversations we've had with thinking about the retreat, thinking about next year, is around how we're going to try to collaborate and continue to do that work with WMATA. And so we had a really good conversation with their board chair, Paul Smedberg, with Randy Clark and myself to start mapping out what are some of those next steps we can be taking. So stay tuned for that. I think we try to map that out for all of us in the continued leadership of COG to keep those conversations moving forward, but some possible collaborations we can do also with the Metro board and our regional leadership there too. So stay tuned. I think we'll have more details and more specificity when we get together next month to be able to talk that through. Next, then, let me move towards agenda item number 5, which is approval of our minutes from the February 14th, 2024 meeting. I'm going to move the minutes for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kate Stewart, for a second. All right, let me now call for a vote to approve the February 2024 minutes. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? And I should have precursor to that, for those that have not met online in a little bit, remember when we do the votes like this, we call for the nays or the abstentions. And so if you do not speak, that is a affirmative vote. So let me make sure I do that again then. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? All right, hearing none, the motion is then going to pass. All right, so move on to agenda item number 6, our consent agenda. We've got one resolution on the consent agenda today. It authorizes COG to receive a grant, procure, and enter into a contract to conduct phase 39 of the Continuous Airport System Planning, or CASP program. You can review that resolution on page 14 of your board packet. Let me move to approve the consent agenda and ask if there's a second.
Second, Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you, Supervisor Bailey, with the second. So we have a motion and a second. So now let me make a call to vote and approve the consent agenda. Are there any abstentions or nay votes on the consent agenda? All right, and hearing none, that measure then passes. Thank you. All right, next up then, we're going to move to agenda item number 7. We are joined by Fairfax County Chief Equity Officer Carla Bruce and Arlington County Department of Community Planning, Housing, and Development to brief the board on proposed regional equitable development principles. Now, these 10 principles, available in page 16 of our board packet, have been developed by COG's Chief Equity Officers Committee, Planning Directors Committee, and our Housing Directors Committee to serve as a guide to centering equity in local comprehensive plans. After that presentation, we'll then be asked to adopt the proposed regional principles, and after the presentation, I'll make sure if there's any discussion or questions, we have some time for that. So, Ms. Bruce, why don't I turn it over to you to be able to help kick off this conversation?
We can't hear you, Ms. Bruce.
I can't either.
Are you able to hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can.
Yes, we can hear you, Carla. Go ahead.
as you all were having microphone issues earlier, I should have checked mine. I should have known that I would have been one of the people that had a mic issue. My apologies. So yes, my name is Carla Bruce. I serve as the Chief Equity Officer in Fairfax County Government. I see Supervisor Walkinshaw and Supervisor Lusk on board, so nice to see you all. I'm here today in my role as a member of the Chief Equity Officers Committee of COG. And last year, I served as one of the co-chairs. And with my colleagues who's here today with me, Samia Bird, worked together on the development of a set of regional principles for equitable development. Before I hand it over to Samia, though, I just wanted to give you all a bit of that background that sort of led us to this work, and we'll walk you through a brief presentation. Next slide. So in our Chief Equity Officers Committee, we have talked over the last few years about how each of us are approaching our work to advance racial and social equity in our respective regions. And one of the things that we all were tackling and frankly struggling with is how do we make racial equity real in our built in natural environments. And we were working with our departments in each of our jurisdictions to sort of figure that out. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity to train the staff in each of those departments, and really were inspired by work that was already starting to be thought about in Arlington County. And so we were looking forward to bringing people together from our planning departments and housing departments to learn best practices and get exposed to tools that would help them in integrating equity perspectives in comprehensive plans. And we ended up doing a summit back in early November of 2023, where we brought staff from, I don't know if it was all the COG jurisdictions, but several of the COG jurisdictions to an equitable development summit. And at that summit, in engaging with those staff and our consultants from Race Forward and our partner organization on our racial equity learning series, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, we worked together to develop a set of guiding principles that we hope can really serve as a regional model and standard for operationalizing equitable development through our processes and policies in land use and housing. Next slide. But one of the things we needed to acknowledge is that really this comes from a historical perspective, right? So while we are trying to, we've made commitments across the jurisdictions to advance equity, we have to really figure out how did inequity get produced. And regionally, there have been studies done, particularly studies from Urban Institute and a study commissioned by the Northern Virginia Health Foundation that demonstrate that some of the disparities that we see in outcomes today are a result of systemic and structural racism. And while we, sort of understand the difference between individual level racism, what we're really talking about here is the institutional and structural level racism, and particularly the understanding that place matters. And so there's been a long history of racial inequity that has been connected to the actions of government planning, zoning, housing policies, and hopefully you all are familiar with the idea of redlining, discriminatory housing practices, predatory lending, and something that we continue to see, not just historically, but even today, displacement. And one example of sort of how this impacts current life outcomes is that in our region, we actually see a life expectancy gap of 27 years across the region. And when you look at the conditions in the communities where we see people living longer versus people with a shorter life expectancy, what we see are notable differences in their built-in natural environment. So under the leadership of Samia, we embarked on developing these principles and having this summit, and now are in the midst of what we call our equitable development mini series, where a group of staff, planning, development, housing related staff, are engaging in a learning series over the next couple of months, focusing on understanding these principles and figuring out how to operationalize them within their comprehensive plans. So because of her leadership on this effort, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Samia, who can walk you through sort of what we're doing now in the principles themselves.
Thank you, Carla.
I'm sorry, I said I should have asked you to do the next slide. That was the previous slide was really showing an example of the determinants of life expectancy in the region. And again, that connection between life outcomes and the built natural environment. This can be found, this particular data point can be found in the report, the Uneven Opportunities Report, in the conditions of wellness specifically that was recently reached, that was recently a partnership of COG and the Northern Virginia Health Foundation.
Thank you, Carla. So as Carla mentioned,
So I'll hand it over to Samia.
okay. Are you all able to hear me? Okay. Okay, great. As Carla mentioned, my name is Samia Bird. I'm the Director of Community Planning.
And now we can't hear Samia either. For
Arlington County. And so I'm sorry, Carla, you said you couldn't hear me, or?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry. Thank
you.
You.
What I had to do, Samia, is I had to go to my
yeah, but she's okay. We can hear
her.
We can hear her.
Down to the mute button and select a different microphone setup. So I went to microphone array on my computer. So just I would go and check and see which microphone you're connected to.
Yeah, you're good. We can hear you.
So just picking up a little bit where Carla left off. Again, my name is Samia Bird. I'm the Director of Community Planning, Housing, and Development for
But while
Arlington
Samia
County.
fixes her microphone, how about I carry on with the presentation? How about we do that?
We got to figure out how to send a text to Carla because we can hear Samia just fine. I think.
So again, because place matters, and you know, as we tackle equity from.
Carla, can you hear me? Okay, I'm gonna mute Carla. Samia, just go ahead and I'll try to text
Let's
her.
try to send a message to her through the. Let's see if we can send a message to Carla through the chat so she can know that we can hear Samia just fine.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Sorry.
So just picking up where Carla left off, just for a little bit of background and context as well, in addition to being the Director of Community Planning, Housing Development in Arlington County, I was previously the Chief Race and Equity Officer for Arlington County. So that's how all of this collides, and a strong background in planning and development with the county led me to this place of wanting to really focus on how we make racial equity and equity tangible for development, those who are in the field, our practitioners, with the idea based on this slide here, with the idea that if we really focus on what we incorporate into our plans, and most jurisdictions are required in Virginia to have a comprehensive plan, DC, Maryland as well, if we really center those on equity, then what we would see in the outcome as things are developed, as policies are put forward, as processes go forward, we would be able to see the outcomes of that equity that's centered into plans. So essentially, we have to incorporate it early on if we want to see it as an outcome in our built and natural environments. So that was some of the thinking there, and that's why it's valuable. As Carla mentioned, a lot of our practitioners, as we've all been on this journey in our jurisdictions and as a region since at least 2018 of advancing equity and racial equity, many of our practitioners have actually struggled with how to actually make it tangible in their work. And what does it actually mean to advance racial equity when we talk about planning, land use, development, and housing work? I think in housing, it's a little bit more tangible for people, but when we talk about planning, because it seems so long-term, and we're establishing a vision essentially that we may not necessarily effectuate until we get to the place of approving development proposals in the case of many elected officials, or the review of applications that come forward that we want to help to manifest those visions. It's hard for them to really understand how to do that. And so because we were all focusing on this, and we've been on this journey, like I said, for advancing racial equity as a region collectively, since we started our partnership with GARE through COG, a coordinated and a collaborative approach was deemed important, particularly because our jurisdictions are very much interconnected. We have people that work in one place, they live in another, they shop and go to school, they're educated, they enjoy recreation and certain amenities as a region collectively. And so looking at how we advance some principles across the region was important. The last point here is implementation is key. So the goal was not just to come up with equitable principles and training for the practitioners and staff doing the work, but really to not have it just sit on a shelf. We want to be able to see the outcomes manifested as these plans, as these policies and these processes are implemented and development actually occurs. Next slide. And so again, just want to highlight our partnership with Race Forward here. As many of you know, we have been partnering with GARE since 2018. They have trained a number of us, including Carla and I, on what advancing racial equity means and looks like in local government. That content and the experts, they have come to be our facilitators for the work that we've been doing around equitable development and planning, the mini series and the workshops, and bringing a lot of national best practices to this work for us. So they are coming from different places like Seattle, bringing some tangible examples of where and how equitable development principles have been implemented in other jurisdictions and bringing them to us to use as a tool or foundation in grounding us in this work. Next slide. And so our process, as Carla talked a little bit about this, we started in the summer thinking about this work. And I'll go back to, I knew that in Arlington, we were looking at updating our comprehensive plan. We do a review every 5 years as required by state code, but we really wanted to take a hard look at updating our plan because there were so many overarching issues and a lot of different places where we were talking about equity, but not comprehensively as rooted in our comprehensive plan. And so with the thought of that, the idea was bringing together all of the different practitioners that are stewards or shepherds of our comprehensive plan. So for Arlington, it's not just the planners, the land use planners, but transportation, open space, housing, stormwater management, all of the different elements that are part of our plan to come together and really have a conversation, the start of a conversation about what would it look like if we did center our comprehensive plan around equity and equitable principles. Then we made that come to life working with COG and GARE in November of this year. We had close to 100 or more staff across the region who participated in this day. We actually got to workshop some of these principles after having an overview of some of our jurisdictions in the work that they were already starting to do, an overview of the history of our region and why this is important, a lot of what Carla mentioned earlier. And then we started to, once we had those principles, we started to share them out with the planning directors group for COG as well as the housing directors group, because a lot of the principles, as you'll see, and probably have already looked at, really do focus a lot on the planning and housing aspects of it, but those aren't the only things. So we wanted to get their buy-in and understanding and make sure that what we were actually putting together and what we had actually workshopped would be something that could actually work for each of the jurisdictions. So while it is the basis of something, we also want to make it tailored to our region. So, and the work that we're doing and how we actually work here, which is very different, I think, in some other regions where we're maybe pulling some of the information from to form the foundation of this. In this month, we are here. Last month, I'm sorry, we also took these back to the Chief Equity Officers Committee because a lot of this work started with them. So we wanted to also make sure what we were thinking about and what we were proposing had an eye and a lens of equity, because that is the center of all of this and why we're doing it. And so who better than to talk to the chief equity officers who are in the region doing the work as well. So that connection between the chief equity officers, our housing directors, and our planning directors was very important in terms of understanding and making sure that the principles would be suitable for what we are trying to do here. That also led us to the start of our 4-part mini series, which is going to go more in depth about the how. So we have the what are the principles, but then how do we actually make these tangible? That is the focus of the 4-part series, and it'll take place over once a month, I believe, from February through May. And then finally, we're here with you today to share the principles, and I'm going to now try to walk through them and give you some high-level overview of the thought behind most of the principles. So the first one is acknowledging history and repairing past harms. And I'm going to read, they're pretty, some of them are a little bit lengthy, but I'll read to you what it says. It says to document the historical harm caused to communities of color by the actions of government through planning, housing, and development, to identify the connections between those actions and today's racially disparate outcomes. The really important things to lift up here are documenting, and then the actions of government, but making those connections between the past and the present help to inform the future. This is a really important part of the principles, laying that foundation, and we are starting to see some of our jurisdictions incorporate that into our actual plans, acknowledging and documenting the historical impacts and influences on the land use and planning and housing decisions so that they can be felt and understood in terms of the vision going forward. The next one, practice inclusive and meaningful community engagement. And actually, that's the third one, so I'm going to skip to what's on your screen here. Commit to implementation with internal capacity and community transparency. So this one, implementing equitable development policies with sufficient dedicated budget, organizational structures, and staff trained in equitable planning practices to sustain and grow jurisdictions' capacity to follow through on their adopted policies. Develop public-facing accountability tools designed with community engagement, and tie them to meaningful budget and policy processes to measure jurisdictions' performance and monitor regional racial disparities. The significance of that second one really hinges on, one, our organizational structures. How are we set up and resourced in our local jurisdictions to actually do this work that we call equity? This carries through in the plans, the policies, and the processes, and the decisions that are being made. Having that accountability as elected officials, as staff, as leadership in our jurisdictions is paramount. And then being able to perform and track the performance and the measures and the outcomes so that we can report back on the outcomes and the change and the impact that we're having. So a lot of the work that we started with COG and GEAR and training us in advancing racial equity, one of the key things that they talk about is organizing, making sure that we have the important foundational structure in place within our organizations to ensure that this work is implemented. And that's how it's carried through in our policies, our processes, and our decisions. The third one, practice inclusive and meaningful community engagement. The significance of here, I think we all know that we are seeing more and more community engagement, more of it focused on inclusive community engagement, diversity and community engagement, and making sure that we have the appropriate and the right voices and all of the voices at the table centered in the decision making. And this one really says require local community participation and leadership in decision making to reflect a diversity of voices, use power mapping with an equity lens to design equitable decision-making structures that account for differences in power among stakeholders and include targeted strategies to engage and compensate historically marginalized communities and voices representing future residents. Build cultural competence into planning processes and design planning processes and materials to be clear, accessible, and engaging for culturally diverse stakeholders. Again, a lot of those elements that are important here: power, the voices being inclusive, using an equity lens in our engagement processes, building our cultural competence so that we are reaching people where they are, and then compensating historically marginalized communities and making sure that what we're doing to engage people is accessible. The way we write things, the way we write our planning documents, the types of language that we use, all of those things are important and they matter. Those first three things that I mentioned to you, these three principles, are process oriented. The next several really focus on policy outcomes. So number 4, next please, is advance economic mobility and opportunity. So we want to promote generational wealth building, local economic development, and entrepreneur activities, including local minority businesses participating in publicly supported capital projects and real estate development. Work with the private sector to avoid and mitigate displacement of businesses during construction of new projects. Enhance community serving establishments with capital and capacity building supports, and increase career pathways for quality living wage jobs for people in all neighborhoods. Something that's really resonant here, I think, and important is not just generational wealth building, the local economic development, entrepreneur activities, and local minority businesses, but I think in the region, as we are all addressing commercial market resiliency and things of that nature, something that's important is not to forget the role of small businesses, local businesses in the work that we do. And so I think it's really important principle here that when we talk about advancing economic opportunity and mobility, we're thinking of the full spectrum of what we mean when we say economic development and who is connected to economic development in our jurisdictions and in our region, and what the opportunity is in terms of being able to provide quality jobs, living wage jobs for people through the economic development work that we do. Next, number 5, prevent displacement. Another important thing, I think, for all of us in our region that we deal with. Develop government regulations, policies, and programs to mitigate economic pressures and allow anyone who wants to continue living in a community to do so as it grows, especially for residents vulnerable to displacement pressures due to systemic racism and economic insecurity, and prevent displacement of small businesses that serve communities experiencing displacement pressure, including preventing predatory speculation of property in communities at risk of displacement. Important here is the regulations, policies, and programs that we use to mitigate economic pressures and allow anyone who wants to continue living in a community to do so as it grows. So we know that we experience growth in our region a little bit differently than perhaps in some other regions. And it is important that anyone who wants to stay in a community has that opportunity to do so. And it's not just individuals and people, but here highlighting also small businesses again. Next. Expand affordable housing options and preserve existing affordability. We know that, again, this is a region-wide issue, affordability, housing supply, and access to housing. Create and preserve healthy, safe, and long-term affordable housing for all family sizes, abilities, ages, and incomes to create integrated, inclusive communities in all neighborhoods through a mix of publicly supported strategies scaled to meet the actual housing need of the region's population growth in communities who have experienced housing discrimination. The important element here, creating and preserving healthy, safe, long-term affordability that's integrated and that we can have inclusive communities. Next, supporting and strengthening diverse community values. The important thing about this one that I'll read again, respect the local culture, character, and diverse values of a community by uplifting existing cultural resources as valuable assets of a community. The important words here are respect, value, and cultural resources. They are valuable assets. Our people are valuable assets. A lot of times I think when we talk about preserving history and culture, we only think of buildings, but we also need to think about the people, and we need to respect what people bring and the culture that they bring to our region, to our jurisdictions. Next. Promote people-centered multimodal mobility and connectivity. Again, this one is important. A lot of times we have focused our efforts on transit-oriented development centered around maybe a metro station or a specific location, but we know now we're at a place where we're talking about transit-oriented communities. So it's not just specific locations along a corridor or a pipe, but the entirety of a community having opportunities to access transit. And what does that do to promote the fact that people can have access to safe, healthy, affordable opportunities for healthcare, education, employment, social services, and the amenities that we all enjoy in our region and in our jurisdictions. So people-centered. The next one, develop healthy and safe communities. Design built environments that really focus on enhancing health opportunities for communities that are currently experiencing racial disparities in health through public amenities. And then I'm going to go to access to affordable, healthy food, physical health, improved air quality, and safe and living environments. I think most of our jurisdictions are also focusing on food security, access to open space. As Carla led off with the social determinants of health, we know health is really important, and access to certain amenity spaces works to improve our health opportunities and outcomes. And then lastly, promote and regulate environmental justice. Again, something that we're all addressing in our jurisdictions and in our region. So this one says, working across silos within government and across other sectors to eliminate disproportionate and harmful environmental burdens on any community, and enacting regulations and securing resources to mitigate and reverse effects of environmental hazards, past and present, that have disproportionately harmed communities of color. Important here is that we're focusing on regulation, we're focusing on resources, and how do we mitigate impacts of the past as well as the present so that we do not continue to perpetuate them into the future when we talk about environmental justice. So these are the 10 principles. And really the goal, again, is to make these tangible. And if these things are rooted in our planning documents, and in particular, our comprehensive plan, then the goal is that when we make these decisions, when we see things start to come up in terms of our built environment, we should be able to see the outcome for people in these principles. Next slide. So the local application, I think I just mentioned a little bit of that, is that we really just want to make sure that this is something that's tangible. We want this to not be focused on, we have these guiding principles, that's great, but we really want to see them implemented at the policy level, at the process level, through the work that we do, through the decisions that are being made at the local level, so that we can see the regional impact of that work. Grounding it in our comprehensive plans and centering it there. And in some ways it helps to empower. Having these principles endorsed at a regional level will empower our staff when they're doing the work, when they're having the conversations with developers, when we have to negotiate certain decisions and deals, that we have something to go back to say, this is why, this is our justification, this is what we're doing, and this is what we want to achieve. And I think that's the real important part of having a set of guiding principles that are endorsed at a regional level, because it gives us something at the local level that's concrete that we can point to that helps with our decision-making processes and the outcomes there. Carla, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I just wanted to, acknowledge that in developing these principles, again, we acknowledge the differences across jurisdictions and how planning and development happens. And so, there may be, or there will be, the need to sort of figure out how this works in each respective jurisdictions. And again, the power of doing it at a regional level, I think, indicates that these are generally sort of how we envision an equitable region. How it gets operationalized specifically might vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Thank you, Carla. A very important point that while we are using these guiding principles as a framework, we certainly recognize that they may need to be tailored to each jurisdiction, because development happens differently for some of us, even though generally speaking, I think our processes may be somewhat similar and aligned, but there are some nuances that I think people would want to account for. But having this overarching frame endorsed at a regional level signifies the importance of them and the seriousness of them.
I also think, I'm sorry, one more thing is that I think that it also communicates to the development community what our intention is. And I can say specifically in Fairfax County, industry has asked us, like they've said, we support, this vision of one Fairfax. What does it mean to us? And I think what we want to do is to sort of express what we ultimately are striving toward. And I think these principals do a good job of communicating those to the development community as well.
Thank you. Absolutely. Next slide. So our last slide now is just that we recommend that the Chief Equity Officers Committee, the Planning Directors, Technical Advisory Committee, and Housing Directors Advisory Committee recommend that the COG Board of Directors adopt Resolution R13, 2024, approving the set of 10 regional equitable development principles that we just set forth. And that is the end of our presentation. We are happy to answer any questions and discuss anything further. Thank you.
Fantastic. Ms. Bird and Ms. Bruce, thank you both very much for not just the presentation, but I know all the hard work that yourself, our chief equity officers, our planning directors, the housing directors have done to lay out that set of principles. So, so thank you all very much for that. And I completely concur with you. Adopting regional principles, I think, will help empower our local governments, our individual governments, to help take deeper dives into considering equity in our local planning. And it helps set that framework to consider when we're updating everything from our comprehensive plans to other elements. I think Ms. Bruce, great example when we think about from a development community, by laying out what the principles are, essentially giving very clear indicators and goals. It helps for development to know with greater clarity, these are the goals that I should be aiming for. And I think that's a really great point you raised there. I was going to ask one question. I'll turn it over to my colleagues for any kind of questions and discussion. Then after that, I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution after that. You know, one of the things that I also have noticed in the District of Columbia, at the council, we created so that every legislation that goes through, for example, we have to go through what we call our RIA, our Racial Equity Impact Analysis. And it is an incredibly helpful document that forces us to look at legislation both as it's introduced, look at it once it's actually been amended and changed. But at times, we actually still make a decision ultimately that the RIA may say, this does not improve equity. And I think as we've done this now for a few years, we wrestled with, you know, is it okay to move something forward that maybe a RIA says this is not going to improve racial equity, but it did have the impact, no matter what, of forcing a conversation, forcing an evaluation, and I think, frankly, elevating a decision-making and thought process that hadn't existed beforehand, and it helped kind of make sure it was front of mind. So I was just going to ask you real fast, as you've looked at, and so as policymakers and decision makers, how do you help guide and advise when sometimes there may be a equity analysis or that equity review that comes back, and a decision may actually still run a little bit counter to what that is, but what value has taken place in making sure it's part of the conversation and decision?
I think it's important what you raised in terms of, first, you have the conversation, you elevate it to be able to have the conversation. I think, simply put, our basic equity analysis really boils down to the benefits and burdens of particular actions. And these are, really, it's really difficult to make a hard, black and white answer. Sometimes you got to just have the information. And so if burden is created by the action, right? If the analysis demonstrates that the action will not produce equity or will in fact produce inequity, what can we do to mitigate it, right? It's not that we won't take the action, but what are the strategies that we can put in place to mitigate whatever inequity is produced. On the other hand, where we see things and the benefits are limited, how can benefit be more broadly shared, right? So kind of, again, not using the analysis to make hard decisions, to say a flat yes or no, but being able to have the conversation and to use, through a community engagement and through data, be able to understand that benefit and burden and take implement additional strategies that help to mitigate burden and hopefully extend benefit more broadly.
Got it. Thank you. I saw a number of hands go up, so I did not catch who all went first, so forgive me if I didn't get the order right. But I see Kate Stewart's hand up, so I'm going to Kate Stewart, then I'm going to go to Andrea Bailey, then I saw Evan Glass, then I saw Libby Garvey, then I saw Monique Ashton. So let me turn in that order, and I apologize if I didn't get the order quite right, but that's the order that I saw it in, getting used to all the boxes again. So Kate,
Thank you, Chair Allen, and thank you for all the work that this committee is doing and all our racial equity officers around the region. I just wanted to say thank you and underscore what I think is the importance of taking this work to this next level that you're doing. And I'm so glad to be able to see that. And to have actually some of our staff in Montgomery County participating in this the next couple of months on this. I think it's really exciting to see this. And Chair Allen, I think in Montgomery County we face some of the similar issues. We have our racial equity and social justice impact statement, and many of the times when we're looking through that and discussing a bill, we have to have these tough conversations. And Director Bruce, I think you raised really excellent points on how we should be looking at these types of impact statements, working them into our discussions. And so I just wanted to say I appreciate that and look forward to having you all back again and hearing from you about the work and how it's progressing, and hearing from our staff in Montgomery County. So thank you.
thanks so much. Let me turn next to Andrea Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate it. Ms. Bruce, just been watching your work, for a very long time, and your colleagues, and we are so appreciative. I would ask, this is just such a great partnership as we grow in the equity lens with all the things that we have to do, transportation, education, all of that. But can you make recommendations as well with the Prince William County is taking baby steps in getting there, and you and I have had that conversation before, and we need a little more suggestions, recommendations, if you will, as it relates to our Racial and Social Justice Commission. And how do we take the lens of equity and what you're proposing and move our county forward faster, if that makes sense to you? And can you, and you may not be able to offer it on the screen, but just saying we need that little oomph, if you will, in our county as we blend regionally. So might want to respond to that, but that may be something, but just offering that as we move forward regionally.
I do. I think that might be an offline conversation, but what I will share, especially in this context, is the significance of our elected bodies in setting the vision and the expectation for the direction that we're heading in. Supervisor Walkinshaw and Supervisor Lusker are on the line today. The vision that our board has articulated for Fairfax County to be one Fairfax has sort of set the foundation for us to be able to, as we say, normalize, organize, and operationalize within our infrastructure. We have really, we haven't sort of handed over responsibility to the community to lead us, while we are definitely led by and sometimes challenged by our community to continue to move forward. The explicit direction about integrating equity into all of our planning and decision making by our Board of Supervisors has given me and the folks that I work with the ability to work with the individual departments. And I think really when you talk about operationalizing it, if you go down to that level, how is this being operationalized sort of within the various business functions of the government? And what are the questions, what are the directives that are leading the work? And again, coming from the elected bodies that we all serve. And so I think, setting that structure up is so critical to being able to continue to challenge and advance the work. And quite frankly, utilizing not just the voice of the community, but the data, because, I think, being driven by data that tells us to be the county that we would want to be, here's where we're not, right? Here's where we're not making the progress that we would like to be, and centering our activities on, sort of closing gaps in moving the data in the direction that we would like to see it. But happy to have an offline conversation to talk more in detail.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let me turn to Evan Glass next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate this conversation with Ms. Bruce and Ms. Bird. And, for all of us in the DMV, every time we look at, historical maps or heat maps based on various measures and metrics, we see these historic inequities. And it's efforts like this try to fix them and take the regional approach so that the east-west divide, which is the starkest in our region, doesn't appear right in the future. And so thank you for leading this. I have a question about your working group and the peer group that you're a part of. Without naming names or publicly shaming any jurisdiction, I'm curious about the best practices within, right? Because clearly I know various jurisdictions are already doing this. You all are leading by example. But I guess the best way to frame the question is, how heavy a lift do you think this is? And I hope it's not, because I hope we all are already doing this work.
So, and this is from the Chief Equity Officers Committee perspective, I guess. I'll let Carla can speak to that, but I can give a little bit of weigh in. On the committee, I think just like our jurisdictions, right, there's variation in where we are in our respective journeys and moving the work forward. Certainly, I think some jurisdictions are already in the process of doing a lot of this work, and so it may be a little easier to center it. But I think for those maybe who are in different place and not quite at that point yet, having this there as a foundation can help lay out a roadmap for them so that they know where they're going. So I think it helps to give some direction so that everybody can actually maybe connect to some part of this, and again, tailor it to where they are in their journey, knowing what the ultimate outcome will be. So I think it can work for most jurisdictions, regardless of where you are. And you have to look at an honest assessment of, okay, where are we and where we're going? And then how can we use these principles and this work to help further that and move us along? And that helps to shape actually their structure, their plan, the organization, and how they organize their work around it actually.
That's great. Thank you.
So thank you. I'm going to turn to Libby Garvey next. Just before I do, we're about 15 minutes behind on our agenda. I saw Libby Garvey, Monique Ashton, and then I think I saw Jessica Fitzwater put her hand up. I'm not going to have any more, if it's okay with everybody to keep us moving. Not going to add anybody else to that lineup, and then I'll call for a motion after that so we can get to our other agenda items as well. But Libby Garvey, let me turn to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me and keeping us moving at the same time. Great. And I want to thank Ms. Bruce and Ms. Bird for coming. I mean, it's great to see how far we've come in, really, it's not all that many years, because equity kind of really even wasn't a thing. We didn't talk about it. They were unstated assumptions about how things were, and that's kind of just the way it was. And now we're making it explicit and really talking about it and bringing it out. I think that's great. I was just going to suggest, I would love your reactions on maybe the next time we get a presentation, would it be possible to have some case studies and show what a jurisdiction has done and how the equity principles have been operationalized or mitigated, or how they actually are applied in a specific case? Because I think that would be really helpful. And I do want to say, when Ms. Bird was appointed originally our Chief Equity Officer, she came from CPHD, and I remember thinking, what a great way to operationalize. This is going to be great. And now to have Ms. Bird back at CPHD, I think is really, really great. But I think it's really getting it concrete. And I wonder if a case study or some case studies might be helpful in helping us all kind of figure out how to do this. I do realize it's different in different places.
Absolutely. I think we can definitely do that. We had actually several case studies that were shared during our summit back in November. So those case studies from other jurisdictions, and perhaps by the time we're presenting again, we'll actually have a case study from one of our own jurisdictions that we can bring forward.
That'd be great. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Monique Ashton, let me turn to you next.
Thank you so much. I'm excited not only to see the progress that we've made, but also at a time where there are other jurisdictions in our country that are going backwards that we're continuing to drive forward. So I wanted to recognize you all. Thank you, Chair, for bringing this forward. Thank you to both of you, Ms. Byrd. And I do have a couple of thoughts. The city of Rockville is working very hard. We actually just had a training for all of our senior level staff to do the GEAR training with Race Forward on Monday night. And we are using equity, trying to use budgeting equity tools and moving forward. There are a couple of areas that I was thinking about that some communities have historically been kept out of opportunity for economic opportunity. One of those is, procurement. And for local governments, municipalities in particular, there's a requirement for disparity studies, which can be very costly. And I'm just wondering, similar to how COG has developed contract vehicles that allow other jurisdictions to access to make things easier, I'm wondering if there's any thought to doing that for disparity studies so that we could look at finding more equity in our procurement and supporting MFTV. So that's one question. And the other piece is also, as we are looking to build more housing all across the region and meeting our housing goals, how do we also support homeownership? Because that's one of the ways that families have transferred support and assets to each other from generations. So those are two things. And then the last thing I'll ask is, sometimes we develop policies and they may have unintended consequences. And as you know, from some of the things in the 90s, things that we're trying to move forward actually inadvertently hurt equity. So how do we also just build in reevaluation opportunities to make sure that we're doing the right thing and not having unintended consequences and addressing them?
Those are great points. On the disparity study, I will say that Arlington is actually in the process of a disparity study now, and it's actually voluntary. It wasn't, a lot of times disparity studies are mandated based on some sort of incident or situation that occurred, and so we're required to do it. But we actually proactively undertook a disparity study because we wanted to understand, and this was, I think, our Department of Management and Finance's approach when we were talking about operationalizing racial equity. This was their approach to understand where we were in our procurement and contracting practices, to understand whether or not we did have any issues and how we might be able to move forward in advancing in that space. I definitely appreciate the idea to making sure that we are considering home ownership when we look at the some of the principles in affordable housing, and then also unintended consequences. Really important aspect, because a lot of times, we're not always mindful. But again, I think too, that's where making sure that if we're operationalizing these principles and we have the equity lens in play, then we will be able to identify perhaps upfront where there might be unintended consequences when we consider benefits and burdens. And then we'll have the strategies, or at least be able to start thinking about the strategies that we can take to help mitigate them. So thank you for those questions and those points.
And I would just quickly mention, related to the disparity study. So Arlington, the city of Alexandria, and Fairfax, we actually have one that we are planning, really leveraging existing contracting mechanisms. And so what we're doing is looking at how, I think Alexandria is looking to ride the contract that Arlington already had. Fairfax is looking to ride the contract that that Alexandria and Arlington have. So I think they're, in addition to COG doing something regionally, we've been trying to come up with some creative ways of leveraging the contracts that have already been established in jurisdictions. And so if there's a particular interest on that, we can make sure you get connected to the right folks.
Great. Thank you very much. And County Executive Fitzwater, I saw that you put your question in the chat and got an answer there. So thank you very much. This has been a fantastic conversation and presentation. So thank you, everybody. This is one of those things where you just feel proud to be part of a regional body that does this good work. So thank you. So with that, then, let me make it official now, and let me move for adoption of Resolution R13 2024, which is this set of principles here. So is there a second?
Second.
Kate Stewart, thank you very much. All right, let's call for a vote then. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? All right, I hear none. Therefore, the motion passes unanimously in support. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership and support.
Absolutely. Thank you both again. Wonderful presentation and discussion. Thank you. All right, next we're going to move to agenda item number 8, which is COG's Air Quality Program and Clean Air Partners. This is going to involve our COG Principal Environmental Engineer, Sunil Kumar, who's going to brief us on our COG's Air Quality Program, including what COG does to track air quality, share regional communications, and planning efforts to address unhealthy air days in the upcoming ozone season. Let me turn it over to Mr. Kumar to get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about very briefly, in the interest of time, what does the COG do in terms of air quality planning? Where are we in terms of our current data? And also talk briefly about outreach and communication efforts. So next slide, please. So here's the map of the COG jurisdictions, and the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, in short called MWAC, which was established in order to perform the air quality planning job in this area. It was established in 1992, certified by the Mayor of District of Columbia and Governors of Maryland and Virginia. Primarily, the job of MWAC is to develop a state implementation plan or air quality plan. And in order to do that, it communicates and coordinates with other committees such as TPB or Climate Change Committee, CPC, Tri-Council, Council of Southern Maryland, state air environmental agencies, and local governments. It also has a very active public participation education programs and coordinates with clean air partners as well. Next slide, please. So this is some of the basic things about criteria air pollutants. CP has published standards for the 6 different types of air pollutants. These are called criteria air pollutants. Out of the 6, COG is MWAC has been asked to do planning for ozone and PM 2.5 or PM 10. They are called fine particles and commonly. So as you can see here, the box, the 2 circles in the box means we are the COG only does MWAC only the plans for these 2 pollutants, out of which right now we are not attaining the ozone standard. We did attain the PM 2.5, PM 10 standard. So our current focus is on ozone. Next slide, please. So here are some dots you're seeing in the map, and those are the air quality monitors. And on the right side, you have a table showing different types of pollutants being monitored by different locations. There is a list. I'm not going to go over that. So next slide, please. So this chart shows the number of days when the ozone standard in this area was exceeded. And the current ozone standard was published in 2015, and it is set at 70 parts per billion, in short called ppb. And you are looking at a number of bars here. Those bars show different color codes, which means different levels of air quality. Code orange, and then you have code red, you have code purple. And as you can see, over the years, starting 1997 until 2023, we have made remarkable progress in reducing this number of ozone exceedance days. So the numbers on each of those bars shows the number of ozone exceedance days in different years, along with the number of different levels of air quality, such as orange, red, and purple. If you look at the last few years, we are doing pretty well in terms of remarkably reduce the number of ozone exceedance days. So those unhealthy days have been reduced to a large extent. However, if you look at the last data point in 2023, there is a big jump, and that is because of the wildfire that threw out smoke in our way that came from Canada and other areas. And as a result of that smoke coming from the wildfires, the ozone exceedance days increased significantly. So that's one of the challenges we have to address that, and we'll be keeping an eye on this year also. Next slide, please. So this is a parameter, basically is called design value, and it shows the trend in over the years. And this is a parameter based on 3 consecutive years worth of data, and it uses this data to evaluate whether an area has attained a standard with respect to a pollutant or not. And you can see here we're doing pretty well, and until 2022, you can see we're dipped down below the standard of 70 parts per billion. We are 67 parts per billion. However, again, because of the smoke and the wildfire, the through bunch of things that cause the ozone levels to go up, we got into non-attainment again. So, however, we will see in the next few slides that the states are working on to get an exemption for those high ozone data in view of the rule that is given to prescribed by EPA to get rid of those high data if you have something like wildfires, which is not under your control, it's just coming across the boundary. So next slide, please. This is the same thing for PM 2.5 in the general terms, we call them fine particles. So accident stage, you can see similar to ozone, we made remarkable progress in reducing the number of days when the ozone PM 2.5 or fine particle standards were exceeded. There were quite a few years, you can say there were no incidences at all. Last few years, there were only incidences in July 4th when the fireworks went up. And as a result, some of the things that make up, then produce PM 2.5 went up. And as a result, we had some 1 or 2 incidences. However, again, in 2023, we had 8 incidences, and all because of the, mostly because of the smoke that came our way. So that's a challenge. However, I just want to emphasize that the big number of drops in the ozone or PM 2.5 accidents that you just saw, I just showed to you, were possible because of the number of emission control programs that were implemented at the federal, state, and local level. So everybody just worked towards reducing the emission program controls, and as a result of that, you are seeing a great progress made over the years in reducing both ozone and fine particle levels. Next slide. So I just want to show you, there was a new standard recently published in February for the annual PM 2.5 pollutant, and it is set at 9.0. The old standard was 12.0. As you can see, the design value, stands at 9.0, which means that we are right at the new standard. The new standard is very tough as compared to the older standard, but we are right there. And we're actually much lower before that until 2020, 21, 2022. But because of the smoke, as I said, the levels again increased. And however, luckily, we're still at the attainment level. We'll be marking again, and we'll be watching very cautiously this year how it pans out. Next slide, please. So in terms of wildfire, is posing a problem for us. And however, EPA has a rule that allows the states to apply for waiver of the high ozone or PM 2.5 data if it is caused by the wildfire. So that's what currently the states are doing in this area, and we hopeful that EPA will approve our request. And once it does that, then the Washington will be back into attainment for ozone again, and that's the only pollutant we are currently in attainment. So non-attainment. I'm sorry. So next slide, please. So here are some of the things that COG does. We do an air quality forecasting. As you can see here, there are 4 different forecast regions. We used to have just one single forecast, but starting this year, we'll be doing 4 forecasts different in 4 different subregions. And as you can see them in different colors here. And the reason is that a more local forecast provides a much better forecast. So we are moving towards that, doing this 4 sub-regional forecasts instead of just having one regional forecast, which we used to do until last year. Next slide, please. So in terms of communication and outreach, COG issues health notification or alerts when they feel that the forecasted or the current real air quality is going to be code orange, red, or purple. Those are bad days, unhealthy days. And we do it through mass emails sent to the public, through local media, touching base with meteorologists, public information officer. We work with our Department of Public Safety at COG, who then works with emergency managers to kind of publicize all that health warnings. And we also do very active on social media, website, and Twitters and Facebook, and we try to communicate that the bad air quality messaging through those platforms. Next slide, please. So we have a COG website where where you can go and see the forecast. We also are very active on social media, Twitter and Facebook. We have air quality dashboard in the COG, where you can go see the status of different pollutants and how we're doing in terms of that. And in this year particularly, we'll be very active in messaging on the wildfire if we encounter one. And finally, we'll talk about a little bit about clean air partners. I'm not going to detail on clean air partners because the other speaker, Jen Desmond, who is the chief of air quality program, couldn't attend there. She was sick. So I will try to cover as much as possible, but I will take specific questions about clean air partner and pass it to her so that she can get back to you. Next slide, please. So this is the sort of the snapshot of the air quality forecast web page at COG. You can see here, the dial here, it tells you, where we are currently in terms of whether they are good air quality, we're moderate or code yellow or bad, or unhealthy for sensitive groups is code orange, or simply unhealthy or code orange, or even worse, which is very unhealthy. So this, this chart here kind of gives you where we are, and it also tells you what was the highest level of pollutant yesterday, what is the forecasted today and tomorrow, and then you have a sort of description of what each of those color code mean in terms of health warnings. Next slide, please. So as I said, Clean Air Partners is a public and private partnership that was established in 1995 by COG and Baltimore Metropolitan Council. It has 30 organizations in terms of membership. There's local governments from DC, Maryland, and Virginia, state transportation environmental agencies, businesses and major employers, as well as advocacy groups from different sectors. Primarily, it was founded to improve the Baltimore-Washington region's air quality and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions through voluntary actions and through increasing the public awareness about the health effects of air quality. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go over this again. I said more or less the past slide will cover this. So move on to the next slide, please. So we said Clean Air Partners, is going to be ramping up its efforts in this coming summer season, which becomes very active for ozone through social media. Clean Air Partners will be engaging through digital and social media, partnering with different partners and engaging with meteorologists. Reaching out to the media, doing lots of outreach events, to promote all and educate public about the air quality and its benefits and the dangers. Next slide, please. Just say there's an Air Quality Awareness Week, which is going to happen in the first week of May. So a summer campaign will be kicked off. Partners will really, we will try to reach our partners. We'll provide digital toolkits. We'll also engage with the media, and we're planning to do in association with Ace Hardware Store, a gas-powered tool exchange or electric tool giveaway later this month. So we'll be taking those gas-powered lawnmowers and kind of giving away the electric power lawnmowers in return in exchange for that. Then this will help to clean the air a little bit. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is we're also Clean Air Partners also is planning to undertake some outreach activity in terms of backyard bubble event to basically drive attention and participation. We're also a sponsorship and partnership to amplify this efforts. So yeah, next slide, please. That's all I have. I'll be happy to take any questions, and particularly if you have any questions on the Clean Air Partners or its activities, I will try to answer as best as I can, but Jen Desmond is the one who works on that, so I will be happy to take any questions and pass on to her, as we'll get back to you. But I can answer questions, more details on the air quality data or attainment status and things like that. Thank you.
Great, Mr. Kumar. Thank you very much for the presentation, and it's helpful to see what all COG is doing to check this as well as communicate around our air quality in the whole region. Let me turn to colleagues to see if they have any questions. I had one quick question that I think is a quick one. You said that a lot of states have applied to the EPA for that, I guess I'll call that maybe a waiver from last year with the Canadian fires. Is there an anticipated decision date from EPA around that?
Yes, so states are in the final stage of submission. Some of them are going through public comment process, and EPA has indicated that it will likely be taking a decision on it in May month. So that will be the beginning of this what we call ozone season, and when the things really heat up. So yeah, May, that's what we're looking for.
Got it. Okay, thanks so much. Rodney Lusk, I see your hand up. Let me turn to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to say you stole the first question I was going to ask, so let me see if I can move to the second one. Very quickly, I noticed you were talking about getting the forecast data down to region, so like Northern Virginia, Maryland, DC. Just was wondering if that might actually go down to a jurisdictional level at some point as well in terms of the data.
So yeah, like I said, until last year, we used to have just one regional forecast that covered the entire MWAC COG area. And now last year, we decided to go to a more final level and issue 4 different sub-region based forecasts, and that was primarily done in order to increase the accuracy of the forecast. So it's a big region, and we through looking at the data, we realized that just one forecast did not do justice with all 4 our different areas. Somewhere, while the forecast was code green, others were in code orange. So it didn't reflect the more localized situation. So in order to do that, we had to come down to that. We don't want to. We don't think we'll go down to even more final level than this, because then it will be too complicated for the public to comprehend. We have not just the forecast, but the real-time alert, and public in this area, they move a lot from one region to another, so it'll kind of get more complicated. So I thought that was the best trade-off between the accuracy of the forecast and convenience for the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions or any other hands up. This is not an action or an item that I take any action on. This is more of a receiving information. So before I move on, just double check and make sure anybody else had any other questions they had. All right, and not seeing any more. Mr. Kumar, thank you very much for your presentation and for the information today. All right, next then we're going to move to agenda item number 9. The board's going to be briefed. Again, this is not an action item. This is a briefing by the Washington Regional Alcohol Program and their president, Kurt Erickson, on How Safe Are Our Roads report. This is an annual analysis on the impact of alcohol and drug-related fatal and serious injury crashes in the region. Following the report, Mr. Erickson will share some recommendations that could be considered to help reduce crashes and improve roadway safety in the region. We're also going to hear from Arlington County Vision Zero Program Manager Christine Baker on their roadway safety program and a region-wide data-driven anti-drunk driving campaign that's taking place. So Mr. Erickson, let me turn it over to you if you're ready, and good afternoon. And Mr. Erickson, I don't think that we can hear you, or at least I can't hear you. Am I alone and not being able to hear?
I can't hear anything.
I can't either.
Yeah.
Me neither.
Next month, we're all going to meet in person.
Good idea.
Kurt, if you can hear us, maybe switching your microphone. That seemed to work earlier.
Hear me now.
There we go.
Yes, there we go.
My apologies, and I'm not too sure what happened with my video, but let's jump into this. What I was saying was that let me do a video again. If we could jump to the next slide, because I know that we're behind. That's what I was trying to say. My job is threefold. It's to give you an overview of the nonprofit Washington Regional Alcohol Program, who we are, some key findings from our latest How Safe Are Our Roads annual report, and some recommendations, as the chairman just said, to reduce drunk driving in our region. If we can go to the next slide. So again, my name is Kurt Erickson. I serve as a president of a nonprofit organization that was formed back in 1982 to fight drunk driving and underage drinking. We do this through public education. I think if people know us on that end of things, for instance, we in Virginia run the Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over campaign, which has had a theme the last couple of years that if you're old enough to drink, to act like it. We also do innovative health education programs in area schools and workplaces. We also do advocacy efforts where we're registered lobbyists in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. But I think if people know us at all, they know us through a free safe ride service that we've done since 1991 called Sober Ride, which we'll be offering this Sunday. It's a reminder to everybody, it's St. Patrick's Day. And it's a free local and life-saving program that over 89,000 area residents have taken advantage of rather than possibly driving home impaired. But for the last 31 years, we've teamed up with COG specifically to do the report that we're going to mention. It's called our How Safe Are Our Roads report. And it's a barometer on how we're doing drunk driving, not just in any one municipality area, but how we're doing as a region. And I will say that what we're going to go over is a little bit dated, but it is the most recent. It's the 2022 data. And that's what I'm going to go over with you briefly this morning, this afternoon. So next slide, you got it. So it's an 18-page report that I think when all is said and done, it gets distilled down to some unfortunate bad news. Specifically, last year's report, which focused on 2021 data, had Greater Washington then bucking the national trend in terms of how alcohol-related traffic fatalities were going. They had gone up during the COVID era at the national level in both 2020 and 2021, 14%, by the way, each year. And the Greater Washington area was bucking that trend and actually having lower number of drunk driving fatalities. That's no longer the case, as while all traffic fatalities went up in the Greater Washington area in 2022, in fact, by 2.6%, the number of impaired driving deaths, either by alcohol or drugs, went up nearly 13%, 12.9%. The worst news is that not only are impaired driving fatalities on the rise, but so too are impaired driving crashes, which went up 13.7%, and drunk driving injuries went up 9.5%. At the same time during this, where you have these trends of upward drunk driving fatalities, injuries, and crashes, the number of drunk driving arrests went down, and pretty significantly. They went down by 9.3%. You've got actually this report, I know that in your board packet today. So let me just read just a couple of things to make sure that I've given the adequate scope of the report. So again, drunk driving fatalities up 12.94%. Some of the larger variances on this is that the District of Columbia went from 2 such fatalities to 6. Northern Virginia as an aggregate, by the way, that our service area is a little bit different than COGS, and the fact that what we're including is Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William counties, and all of the towns and cities therein. In Northern Virginia localities during 2022, drunk driving fatalities went up by 40%, so really outpacing the region from 30 such deaths to 42. Drunk driving injuries, as I already mentioned, went up over 9%. One of the larger variances is Loudoun County, that went up by 70%, from 97 such injuries to 165. Drunk driving crashes, as I mentioned, went up 13%. This is 3,853 crashes that happened in just the Greater Washington area, drunk driving crashes. It's roughly a little over 10 DUI crashes every single day in 2022. And the other figure that I wanted to close on was the number of drunk driving arrests. These are local arrests for either driving under the influence or driving while impaired, so either DUI or DWI. These decreased by 9.3%. At the same point, we're still a region that annually arrests over 9,000 persons every single year for DUI, just in the Greater Washington area. It's roughly 774 DUI arrests every single month in 2022. Some of the larger variances on that were Prince George's County had a downward trend of DUI arrests. They went down by 37%. Prince William County went down by 33%. Conversely, Loudoun County, who I mentioned earlier, actually had an uptick in drunk driving arrests. They went from 424 such DUI arrests to over 531. The only good news that I think that you can glean from this report is the fact that we still are below the national average in a positive way in terms of the percentage of all traffic deaths that involve drunk drivers. To this day, 31% of all traffic deaths in this country involve drunk drivers, which is a little staggering. The Greater Washington area, with the numbers that I just mentioned right now, is 27%. There's little solace in that, and the fact that all of these numbers are up. I suppose the other solace that you can find is looking at this as a little bit of a more longitudinal way. when in fact that drunk driving trends have been largely down over the last couple of decades. One of the things I mentioned, I said that we do the Drive Sober, Get Pulled Over campaign in Virginia. So it's easy to have those numbers at my fingertips that in the last 2 decades specifically, drunk driving crashes in that locality have gone down 38%. Drunk driving fatalities have gone down by 23%, and drunk driving injuries have been virtually cut in half. They've gone down by 49%. If we go to the next slide. And again, I'm trying to catch you guys up and looking at the clock. So the recommendations here, and if anybody heard this presentation last year, they're largely the same for understandable reasons, is that we still need to make progress on this issue, but there is a new one. And there's one that I really want to have bear some emphasis. Specifically, and you obviously can read the page in front of you, is that we're looking at double down on what works. And the things that we know what works are sobriety checkpoints, which can reduce drunk driving fatalities significantly. That's actually less my opinion than it is the findings of the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety that measured the efficacy of sobriety checkpoints and found out that if they're done well, they can reduce drunk driving fatalities by as much as 20%. I'll skip over the interlocks because I'm going to come back to that under another heading below. There's not a drunk driving, an anti-drunk driving group in the world that doesn't have a focus on seatbelts. If we just know that the routine wearing of seatbelts is the single most effective measure to reduce crash-related deaths and injuries. And so that's great that we have primary seatbelt laws in Maryland as well as in the District of Columbia, but we don't have it in Virginia, and that would be a life-saving move. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that point. Increased testing. There's been bills in both Virginia and Maryland in recent years to increase testing so that we can differentiate between whether someone's impaired by alcohol or drugs, because clearly the interventions that are necessary to address as much are very different. And it would be great to know which of the two it is. There's been a number of oral fluid pilot program bills that have been introduced in both localities as well to try to do exactly that. Embracing technology. Again, ignition interlocks. DC, Maryland, and Virginia are all localities that even if it's your first offense, that you have to get as a condition of a restricted license, one of these in-car breathalyzers installed on your vehicle for a limited period of time that will prevent you or anybody from operating your vehicle if it senses that you've been drinking. As the chairman well knows, because I was actually looking at a quote of his back on his role as a Transportation Committee chair, when this bill came up on his STEER Act, that we had, as I mentioned, nearly 1,200 DUI arrests in the District of Columbia last year. Yet in November, we only had a total of 8 EIGHT, 8 persons on the interlock program in the city. So it's an underutilized program. It's offender paid. It can reduce drunk driving recidivism by as much as 70%, according to the CDC. There's also, those states that already have it. And by the way, DC, Maryland, Virginia are all first offender states. Again, where if you have it, you have to put this on your vehicle. But there's loopholes, there's gaping loopholes in at least Maryland, where the majority of people get a probation before judgment sentence for their DUIs, according to MBA, and therefore escape this public protection method or public protection action of getting an interlock on their vehicle, which is an action of an offender paid penalty. So it's something that I think has a lot of support. Let me go to the next slide. Alternatives to DUI, sober, I mentioned again, I don't want to couch that in any way as a panacea to the drunk driving ills of any location. But again, when you have 89,000 would-be drunk drivers taken off the area roadways, the expansion of that or the continuation of that is great. It'd be a missed opportunity if I didn't mention that both, the DC, Maryland, and Virginia Highway Safety Offices are co-sponsors of this effort. And again, the next one runs this Sunday, St. Patrick's Day. Rideshare, greater use of rideshare. I think COG has gone on record in terms of years past of wanting an expansion of metro hours. We cannot echo that more to get back to late night service, late night weekend service. Drunk driving has certain stereotypes. Some of them are earned, and the fact that the majority of drunk driving crashes happen at night and happen on the weekends. So if we can make metro service available as an alternative to somebody driving, that much the better. The new recommendation is the ensure and maximizing reciprocity. This is to fully implement state-to-state driver history record capability so that you can get timely, accurate information on high-risk drivers. This is usually done through the driver license compact But it's also something that I'm referring to in the internal way. And reciprocity may not be the best word, but it is to understand that there's better communication that's needed. And one of the things that we were talking about, and I thought I had it in front of me, yes, is that, and I feel like I'm being solicitous with twice mentioning the chairman and his STEER Act, but the legislation that passed the DC Council specifically, and following, again, this Friday is going to be a year anniversary on the Rock Creek Parkway crash, that triple fatality of a driver that had 5 DUIs, but still had a valid DC driver's license. Reciprocity can also mean just the timely exchanging of information. And the STEER Act specifically mandates that DMV in the district, at least on a monthly basis, submits a report to the Superior Court of the District of Columbia and the Office of Attorney General, listing the number of revocations on a driver's license, and every 6 months reporting that same information to the council. This is again to try to address repeat drunk drivers, at least, that are really overrepresented in fatal crashes where alcohol was a factor. Lastly is enforcement. It's not last for any other reason of emphasis, and that's what I said. Traffic safety is public safety. There's no question in my mind that the numbers that I've just reported on are partly borne by the fact that we do not have fully staffed law enforcement agencies. When I gave this report last year, and I wasn't able to look up the latest numbers, but at that point, the Virginia governor was trying to bring to bear a number of budget items, and one of it was for increased law enforcement. And in his outreach, he had cited the fact that some cities at that point, this is last year, about the same time, some cities were approaching in Virginia, were approaching a 40% vacancy rate of law enforcement officers. That the Virginia State Police then had 250 or more unfilled positions, and that the Virginia Sheriff's Association was approaching a 20% vacancy rate. So if I had to throw out every other recommendation and just rest on one of them, I would certainly mention or certainly emphasize the staffing of area law enforcement as a means to identify and apprehend drunk drivers. Again, being conscious of time, and I see that it's 1:40. One of the other examples is what I'm going to shift gears with right now, as the chairman had mentioned. So I want to specifically mention that there's a COG-supported regional effort specifically to create recommendations for Greater Washington localities to implement data-driven programs or strategies to address impaired driving. My colleague, Christine Baker, she's the Vision Zero program manager at Arlington County, is going to be talking to you about an undertaking that's currently underway that I think is supposed to wrap up by July. And you can see hopefully what the benefits would be on this issue, but specifically for other localities to use. So if we can go to the next slide, and Christine, it's all yours.
Thanks. And we can go right to the next slide. Thanks. So I'll just give a quick overview of our purpose of this study. We're doing a research and literature review, crash data analysis, and then talk about recommendations and timeline. Next slide. So Arlington, along with the rest of the region, has seen an uptick in alcohol. It's been a factor in many of our recent fatal crashes, as well as severe injury crashes, and that's why we worked on submitting this application to the Regional Roadway Safety Program. It's something that has been a topic of a lot of the regional Vision Zero calls that all the coordinators in the region, we meet periodically just to kind of share what's going on, our issues, and alcohol just keeps being, right there in the forefront, especially in our most severe crashes. So we worked all together in creating the submission that went into consideration for the Regional Roadway Safety Program. And we're very thankful to be awarded the $80,000 in technical assistance to help us really look at existing and successful anti-drunk driving programs, and then talk about regional alcohol related crash patterns and factors. And I know kind of both of these things are already happening, but we wanted to really get a deep dive, dedicate resources to this with the objective of creating recommendations for regional municipalities and jurisdictions to educate their communities on local drunk driving issues, really kind of show what our biggest pain points are, what our challenges are, and then alternatives that community members can use, or things to think about, messaging, to create this consistent message across the region to tell this story. And we're also hoping that this could be a gateway for further development of relevant marketing materials, et cetera. So next slide. First, we started with the research and literature review. It's almost wrapped up now. The intent was to really document existing programs in the region. So kind of get an idea, get everything in one place. What's a one-stop shop for all the resources that we have? We want to identify, what other programs are working. So seeing what, states, municipalities, jurisdictions with the lowest impairment rates in the country are doing, and kind of hone in on those key policies. We're also identifying factors that lead people to drive impaired or potential incentives that encourage people not to drive drunk. So kind of looking at root causes, and then completing this literature review that packages everything up and has actionable, impactful recommendations coming from it. Next slide. And then the second task is looking at the regional crash data. And this is we've been talking about doing this for a long time across the Vision Zero region. So we're really excited to be jumping forward and looking at patterns about, where alcohol involved crashes are happening, patterns in the origins. So kind of like the zip codes of the people involved in the crashes, that's easily available through the data set, kind of figuring out, patterns. Are there patterns there? Are there patterns in the factors or circumstances around the alcohol involved crashes, and any other trends or outlying factors identified? Because again, we're really trying to dig into those root causes so we can then address the problems. So this crash analysis combined with that literature review can help inform, okay, what are our biggest issues we're seeing? And then what are the solutions that are working in other places to help address these? Next slide. Which will then bring us to the campaign recommendation. So that's, again, to create this uniform campaign strategy that we can share and disseminate using existing resources, linking people to what already exists, because Kurt just showed you all the amazing things RAP is doing. So really helping to elevate that, complement it, and you create these or this regional wide message that we can all share to help us address this problem that's happening everywhere. And then we're going to furnish a list of action items, like kind of a checklist that range from anything that's no cost, to larger scale initiative concepts, and, kind of help make the case if we need to, push for more funding or more, support or backing for initiatives or policies, because Kurt just mentioned a whole long list of things that we could be doing as well. So I think all this really ties well together, and we're just hoping to, bring to light what is really happening when you look at the data in very fine detail and help to tailor what our recommendations are to really push forward to have an impact to reduce, drunk driving and the horrible crashes that happen as a result of it. Next slide. So our timeline is right now, we're finalizing the literature review, the research, and all the data analysis. Throughout summer, we'll be developing recommendations in a report. And in fall, we'll be sharing our findings and results throughout the region. And we have had, all the different folks who helped create the submission involved in the project meeting. So that way we're making sure it's kind of tailoring to the needs of the different jurisdictions that helped to come up with the idea. And then we'll be sharing the results again widely throughout the region to help push forward those recommendations and make sure that we start to progress wherever we can to address the issue. And I'll pass it back to Kurt. Thanks.
I think we've caught you guys up with 10 minutes to spare, but I know we need to leave some time for Q&A. We can go to the next slide. I think that has both mine and Christine's contact information, should anybody need it.
Great, Kurt, thank you so much. Appreciate Ms. Baker and Mr. Erickson, you were sharing this. I'm going to open it up to colleagues for some questions. Kurt, appreciate the multiple shout outs for the STEER Act. Thank you very much. That certainly, as we look at what will be a very sobering one-year anniversary this Friday of the deaths that took place on Rock Creek Parkway with that crash, really did highlight some pretty incredible failures to be able to help get somebody who should never have been on the road, but it also, from doing our job of oversight and reform, really did help change our systems. And so I'm looking forward to having this be implemented by the mayor and then have safer roadways in the District of Columbia. I saw Ruben Collins. I think I saw your hand up first, so let me turn to you.
Hello, and thank you for this presentation. This particular subject shows one of the challenges as it relates to looking at this type of issue regionally. The question I have, because I'm aware of the law in the district and in the state of Maryland where I practice, but do you have a dram shop legislation in the state of Virginia?
No.
Okay, I'm just curious of that.
Yeah, there's been a number of attempts to do. There actually was no attempts this year during its General Assembly, but in the most recent year, it was trying to get a foot in the door by having it apply. One version had it apply to just underage drinkers that were later subsequently involved in a crash, and I can't remember the other one. But all other attempts to have dram shop in the Commonwealth have failed to date.
No, but thank you. It's very timely because, you know, it's an issue in the Maryland legislature as well, just dealing with challenges on one of the major road arteries in the state of Maryland is Maryland Route 210. And it's traditionally had a lot of fatalities on that road, and through the years, like DUIs have been challenges there, speeding in particular. So, but thank you for that.
Thank you for the question.
Libby Garvey, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and just a quick thank you for the presentation. I'm really pleased about the study because I don't even know what that was, Ruben, that you brought up, Mr. Collins, about, you know, dram. I don't even know what you were saying that's not happening in Virginia. I probably should know, but I don't. Doesn't surprise me. There's a lot of stuff that the General Assembly doesn't let us do. But perhaps this study, you know, we can take another run at it and really double down. I mean, I think, you know, we had the Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There was a lot of anti-drunk driving stuff. And then I think it all kind of faded away and we need to, you know, re-energize it. And I think this study should help us do that. So appreciate it and really can't wait to see the results and really dig down into what really is going on. Because there are probably a lot of kind of assumptions that maybe not true about what's actually happening. So just a thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ruben, you want to give the quick 30-second version of dram shop policy so people know what that is?
Yeah.
It's
Quick
an insurance
30-second is if you were drinking at a bar, for example, okay, and you were to receive a DUI, or for example, someone was injured as a result of you driving while being intoxicated, that legislation, or if that was in the law, it would allow you, you know, the ability to actually seek as a potential person to sue the owner of the bar.
Ah, over serving. The idea is,
Correct,
got it.
correct.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
One intermediate step that's out there that doesn't require legislation, but it can be implemented administratively, which is either a step towards dram shop, which again creates standing for civil liability, is to collect place of last drink information, which some localities do on their own. It really can be invaluable information. And yes, I know it's not maybe the purest of information when you're asking somebody that's impaired, and you always hear the you know, the anecdote that nobody wants to give up their favorite drinking spot. But I don't think people are that creative when they're pulled over for drunk driving, and indeed they're guilty when they're asked for the place of last drink. And the only reason this information can be valuable is that if you have repeated places that come up time and time again, then it really creates an opportunity for intervention through either, it doesn't have to be law enforcement, it could be ABC, to make sure that staff are adequately trained and so forth.
Yeah, we actually have a local program, which Ms. Baker might describe, where our police work cooperatively with, you know, establishments and train. There's a whole training component that goes into it. We have found ABC to be uniquely unhelpful in a lot of things, but we do have some local programs here in Arlington that I think do help. I don't know if Ms. Baker wants to discuss that a little bit, but and probably we don't have time. But we in Virginia, when we get told we can't do things, we do find other local ways to try to get around it. So thank you.
The Arlington Restaurant Initiative under
Yes,
the Arlington County Police Department is a model program that has been replicated in other places. To the extent that it could be replicated around the Beltway, and Christina, don't let me steal your thunder. It would be a great thing to do.
Yeah, that is led by our police. I can share a link with folks just to save some time. But they're doing great work, just kind of getting different restaurants to participate, training, community partnerships, and an outreach component as well.
Yeah. And we had one restaurant owner who just really didn't want to participate. I can't remember. Anyway, he did in the end, but it was a bit of a battle. So thank you.
Just to put a plug in, you'll see Chief Penn at Ireland's Four Courts kicking off the Sober Ride program a day after tomorrow. And I can't give you a better example of that, of community policing, than to have law enforcement in an Irish bar 2 days before St. Patrick's Day announcing this anti-drunk driving initiative.
Thank you for the Arlington shout out. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Clark Mercer, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just real quickly, this is a good time to remind folks, working with Monica on our team here on a legislative package, obviously the sessions are wrapped up in Virginia, wrapping up in Maryland, but there's a few different pieces of legislation that were flagged today, our ideas on interlock and drunk driving and seatbelt laws. So as these things pop up, I'm taking notes, I'm sharing them with Monica, but do the same if there's something you think we need to get behind and think about how to get behind it and who to ask to carry things. Because we're going to be in that mode pretty quickly to get ready for future sessions and sessions in DC as well. So just ongoing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, again, a great presentation and discussion. Again, we don't have an action on this one, but appreciate the briefing and all the information updates. So thank you all very much. All right, that gets us right back on schedule, actually. So we now have agenda item number 10, which is other business. So on this off chance, is there any additional business that a member wanted to raise today? All right, I'm seeing no hands. All right, well, seeing none, that means that we now are able to adjourn for the day. And actually you now have 7 bonus minutes of your day. So I want to thank everybody for participating. Really great presentations, really great conversations and discussions. So thank you all very much. Our next COG board meeting is going to be in person on Wednesday, April 10th. So I look forward to seeing you all there. And I can't wait to find out what lunch is going to be that day. So appreciate it. See you all on April 10th. And we now stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.